So because I believe in honesty, I have to begin this month of abundance with a confession. I am, by nature, a scarcity person. I'm always thinking things would be better if there was more time, more money, more people, more energy. As much as I would like to stand here and say that I'd be the fisherman from our story today, I'd probably be the businessman. I'm always wondering how I could do more and be more. And I'm always pretty sure that life would be better if I could. I have to work really hard to get out of that to get into that kind of abundance mindset that Peter just spoke about. I have to work hard to embody the fisherman sitting there basking in the sun. When life is 90% good, I have to work really hard not to focus on the 10% that is bad. And I begin with this confession for two reasons. First, I think it's really important not to guilt people into abundance. That doesn't actually work. We've all seen this happen, right? I'm thinking of just this week, a bunch of you had no power. Do you remember that? Is it distant now? I hope it's distant. And then there were some people who were saying, well, at least you're not in Puerto Rico. It's a good perspective, right? It's true, yes. And it's not always helpful when you're trying to figure out how to live in a house that was designed to have electricity and currently doesn't. It's not helpful to guilt people into abundance thinking. We can always think of ways that life could be worse, right? Life could always be worse. It's true. And there are times when that's super helpful, right? When we need that. But more often than not, it just makes you feel guilty for complaining about your problems and doesn't actually make life feel any more abundant. Guilt rarely equals abundance. Second, my scarcity tendencies mean that for me, abundance is a practice more than anything else. I practice abundance because I haven't mastered it. I practice abundance because it doesn't come naturally, and yet I know it matters. And so today and all month, I want to invite you into this practice of abundance without guilt or shame. Without guilt or shame, but instead with a curiosity about what abundance might be able to bring to our lives. In chapel today, in Children's Chapel, our children got to hear the age-old stone soup story. You all know that one, right? It starts with just one person who's got that pot of water with the stone in it and is sure that it's going to be delicious soup. And then, lo and behold, the whole village comes in with a couple carrots here and a couple potatoes there, and eventually there is this hearty, delicious pot of soup for everyone. It's like the ultimate abundance story, right? And it reminds me somewhat of the Hanukkah breakfasts that were a tradition at the first church that I worked at. I somehow was in charge of organizing the 8th grade class and their families to make these breakfasts happen every year. And every year there weren't quite enough sign-ups to feed the number of people that we were expecting. You know that feeling? And so every year I worried until the very last minute that we were going to run out of food, especially latkes, because those were everyone's favorites. And every year, someone came in with an extra batch of latkes or another dozen bagels or another bowl of fruit. These people hadn't signed up, but they brought it anyway. And every year there was food left over at the end. Every year without fail. And every year I wasted time and energy worrying about scarcity. When time and time again, the reality was that we what we needed always arrived. It always arrived. I wish I could have had the perspective of the woman in the stone soup tale who is just entirely confident that that pot of water with the stone in it is going to turn into soup. I wish I could have the confidence of that fisherman in our story who just knew that he already had everything he needed and that the next day would be the same and the next day after that. These characters hold up a mirror, showing me how much time I spend worrying unnecessarily about scarcity, rather than appreciating the abundance of this world. Perhaps they can hold up a mirror for you too. So how do we get to this mindset of abundance? It sounds great. How do we get there? How do we trust that what we need is here already? Peter suggested that it's a choice between fear and love. And there's a lot of truth in that. We can choose to fear the world or love it. We can choose to fear one another or love one another. We can choose to fear the scarcity that might exist or love the abundance that is before us. These are the options we have. There certainly seems to be a love-fear dichotomy in our fisherman story. The businessman is afraid that the fisherman is being lazy and that he isn't living up to his full potential, what he really could be in the world. The fisherman, on the other hand, is clearly in love with his life, enjoying that beautiful afternoon with no worries on his mind. I think that we could take that love-fear dichotomy one step deeper as well and think about how it speaks to how we feel about ourselves. Like so many other things in life, abundance ultimately is about whether or not we believe that we are enough, whether or not you believe that you are enough. So you could also look at the story of the fisherman and wonder about how each of those characters actually feels about themselves. While it seems clear that the fisherman is pretty confident that he's enough, he's pretty sure of his own worth, I wonder about the businessman. Could it be that he is accusing the fisherman of being lazy because he himself feels lazy? You'll note that he's not working in the middle of the afternoon. Could it be that this businessman who acts so confident and sure of himself and has all the answers is actually afraid that he is not enough? I wonder. So often when we talk about abundance and scarcity, we are talking about money or resources or time. But really, when it comes down to it, I wonder if our sense of abundance or sense of scarcity actually begins with an assessment of our own self-worth. If I am not enough, how can I ever understand others to be enough or the world to be enough? If I can't recognize my own abundant self-worth, how can I recognize the worth of anyone or anything else? Both our Unitarian and Universalist heritages offer an abundant answer to the question of what is my worth? The Unitarian Universalist answer to the question of love or fear is always love. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the predominant gospel that was preached in these parts was about sinfulness and inadequacy. It was a gospel of fear and scarcity. You had better be good, or you will be punished. You had better be righteous, or you will go to the fires of hell. It was a gospel predicated on the assumption that we were born not good enough, and that there was not enough salvation to go around. It was limited, scarce. Both the Unitarians and the Universalists fought that narrative with a message of love and worthiness, and a message of abundant salvation. In 1828, Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing proclaimed our human worth in a sermon called Likeness to God, in which he builds on the idea that humans were made in the image of God to lift up human goodness, intelligence, and love. It was a revolutionary statement for its time, declaring that people were not born into sin, but instead born into love and goodness, and that our work was not to get rid of the sin, but to fulfill our full potential of love and goodness. Now, at the very same time, Universalists were preaching a salvation that was so abundant that it was freely given to all, while others in New England claimed that salvation was limited, telling their people that heaven was only open to a limited few. The Universalists offered up the notion that heaven was open to all, that each one of us is worthy of salvation. From the very beginning, Unitarianism and Universalism have offered this countercultural idea that we are enough. I am enough. You are enough. That was the gospel they preached. And that continues to be the gospel we preach. In a time when our worth is too often measured by our money and our titles and our possessions, Unitarian Universalism declares that we are enough without any of that. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, no matter what you have done with your life and where you live or who you spend your time with. And that means you, each one of you. If that's not a message of abundance, I don't know what is. Now, of course, the challenging part of this type of abundance, because it couldn't be easy, is really believing that it applies to us. Now, I would never say that it's easy to believe in and affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of other people. It's really hard, right? But I think it's even harder to believe it about myself, to believe that I am inherently worthy, that I am enough. And that's, I believe, where practice comes in. So several years ago, just before I was going to interview with the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, the UU body that determines whether or not one can become a minister, so it's, an easy interview. No weightiness to that at all. I was feeling a lot of doubts about my own self-worth. As is so often the case, my anticipation of the judgment of the committee caused me to judge myself more harshly. And so I was having this conversation about my own self-worth and my doubts of it, probably for the 5th or 6th or 7th or 10th time, with my spiritual director. And she asked me to stop and think, what are the things that I am good at? What are the gifts within myself that I bring to ministry and to this upcoming interview? I think I sighed a few times. And then I slowly began to list things to her, and she surreptitiously wrote them down. After we got off the call, she emailed my list, to me. She didn't just tell me I was enough, because I wasn't actually going to believe that. She showed me by making me be the one to create the list. And as I read it that first time, I thought, oh, right. I'm good at a few things. Maybe I am enough after all. I still take out that list sometimes when I'm feeling at my most inadequate, to remind myself again and again that I too have inherent worth, that I too am enough. This is the practice piece. We can't snap our fingers and suddenly know our worth. I wish we could. We can't suddenly know our inner abundance, but we can practice reminding ourselves and each other. We can choose, probably over and over again, maybe every day, to love ourselves rather than fear our inadequacies. It's not easy, but it matters. So how do you remind yourself of your inner abundance? Do you have a list somewhere? Do you have a mantra you say to yourself? How do you remember your own inner worth? And when you're able to do that, how does it change the way you see the rest of the world? Practicing abundance in our world begins with trusting in the abundance of our own gifts, trusting that we are enough just as we are. Practicing abundance begins with choosing love for ourselves, which then allows us to choose love for one another and love for our world. So let me tell you this. What you need is right here already, here in each of your hearts. You are enough. What we need is already right here in this room. What we need is you, your abundant, loving self. May we always know it to be so.